Welcome to this Zoom Mastering the Machine webinar for April 2nd, 2021. Our guest was Vlad Romanov of SolisPLC and co-host of the Manufacturing Hub podcast with Dave Griffith. Hope you enjoy it.
This is April the 2nd, and this is the Mastering the Machine webinar that I've been doing since, well, I did a few in August as a test. I had never done webinars before, so I tested that out. Let me get you guys in my screen so I look like I'm looking at the camera. And anyway, I started this in August, did a couple, then I opened my little Automation Academy thing in November, and I did one webinar every 2 weeks. Why? Because in my group I said I would. So that was the main driver behind that. I actually joined a thing called the Membership Academy to learn about how to create a membership site and things like that. When I created mine, and they said, have live events. So that's kind of where some of this started from. Then I renamed it Mastering the Machine after a program that I started a long time ago. And I'll talk about that a little bit maybe at the end. But anyway, today, Vlad is already here, and we have a couple other people on the call. We have it says D. Smith, and we have Scott C. And what I do is I do post this to YouTube at the end, and it's kind of public for everyone to grab, and I usually put a link on LinkedIn. And on these webinars, I've had as many as 11 people. That can cause its own problems because sometimes there's a lot of noise and things like that. So you have to kind of mute people, especially if they're from somewhere else and you can't really tell what they're doing there, but they're making lots of noises. So anyway, that kind of thing can happen. So today, of course, Vlad is here, and I'll be talking a little more about him, have a little introduction here. But part of why I really wanted to talk to you, Vlad, is because you are a content creator like myself. So everybody else I've ever talked to on this webinar has been a technical person of some kind, and they really don't create content. So I talked to one guy that did serialization and validation for the pharmaceutical industry. I talked to Jeff Buck, who I'll be mentioning a little later. He is one of the officers at Automation NTH, which is a company I work closely with. That's an integrator, big integration company. And then I've had Juan Pablo Garbin on twice, and he's the guy that I do the work for down in Miami. So I do a lot of systems integration for him. So all these people have been technical people, and that's what we talk about is technical stuff, systems integration. But this is the first time I've had a content creator. So I'm going to flip, and this is my little content creation journey. Why did I get started in doing that? I started a blog in 2011. I was working for somebody else at the time. And it was just free information. People had asked me questions there, and I said, well, I don't even know what a blog is, but I'm going to create a website and start throwing information out there. And I was religious about it for a while. I put 5 posts a week, and then it slowed down more, 1 post a week, went one time 4 months without posting anything, and then kind of got back into it because I felt like I'd run out of things to say. Coming out of that blog, I published this book, which was Industrial Automation Hands-On. It was a collection of things from the blog, and amazingly, McGraw-Hill picked it up, which I didn't even know how to market it to McGraw-Hill, but my daughter actually helped me with that. And then in 2015, it was published in Portuguese. So that was kind of a neat thing. I'd actually become an author magically. Then I made a mistake and published a little publication called PLC Hardware and Programming through a self-publishing company. I spent a bunch of money, and I provided all the content, and they published it. And I don't really I have all the rights to the content, but I don't. People have asked me, well, can you get me the book? And I'm like, well, I have to order it the same way you do, right? I don't get a major discount or anything. So learned a lot about book publishing, and in 2019 published this book. And this book is truly self-published from my own company. So that was kind of neat, and I've done well with this book. So then I started this Automation Academy, made my first video this year, which Vlad has made lots and lots and lots of videos. So that's one of the things we share. And then coming in 2021, I'm writing 2 new books. And again, they are closely tied to this company, Automation NTH. They have a program called NTH University. And this is entirely for their own students, right? Their own interns. They take 4 to 8 interns a year. And then they also provide to some large companies, they provide education, including Dexcom and West Pharmaceuticals and some people like that are out where you're from, Vlad. So
that's right.
That's my content creation journey. And now I'm going to introduce Vlad formally here. And Vlad is, I got a lot of this from his LinkedIn, and you can see his picture here, and he looks kind of like the one on the screen there.
A very formal picture.
There you go. He got his MBA apparently this year, which is very cool.
It's coming up. It's a month and a half left, but yes, it's coming up.
Okay. Control systems and automation consultant. I wrote down some of the places you've worked, and there's quite a list here. P&G, huge, right? Big, big company. Kraft Heinz, another big, food-oriented company. Mitsubishi, this Techstars and Bloom Chat. You'll have to explain some of those a little later. Vlad himself had a blog that it looked like the first post was about 2013, and I read a bunch of that. That was cool. Was a QA game tester. That's pretty cool.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Programs in Java and C and C++ and those kind of things. So, and you've built an app, right?
I have. That's Bloom Chat, actually.
Okay.
So Bloom Chat was an iOS app. I guess we'll get into it in a chronological order if you'd like. It's going to be interesting, I think.
Sure. So anyway, and I can either take this screen off or go back to the beginning one, or we can just share the screen and talk. Or you could bring up, for instance, your SolisPLC. I'm interested in that because you started doing this early on, and you apparently are doing really well with it and selling programs even to industrial companies, right? Doing training for them.
Well, let's, I guess, if I may start kind of from the beginning. I think people, ask me about the beginnings of SolisPLC, but I think it stemmed even before that, right? I think you've mentioned a couple of things that I had done that led to SolisPLC, and I think it's important to understand those steps, and that kind of reveals where SolisPLC is today. So if I may, going back all the way to my school years, right? So I studied electrical engineering in Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, and I graduated in 2013. So right out of college, I relocated to Los Angeles, all right? So this is summer 2013, midsummer. And while I was looking for work, it took me about 6 months to find my first job, obviously, because I had no network, no connections, essentially nobody in that area. I was just applying to places through very direct means, right? Just sending the resume and never hearing back except 1 or 2 companies, and then going to interviews. What I did in that downtime is I started a small blog on Arduinos and Raspberry Pis at that time. It was still fairly small. There were a couple of people doing it, but it wasn't as covered as it is today, right? So electronics, and more specifically, accessible electronics, were not covered that well. So I started creating content. I remember shooting my first video on Arduino and thinking nothing more of it. I filmed it on my phone using a cardboard box that was over the desk, and it was shaking, and I had, I would talk in the phone and it would pick up the noise and what have you. And so I put up my first video, second video, didn't think much of it. And it actually started picking up, right? That was my first kind of YouTube experience. I had very little knowledge of how to edit videos. So it was a very clunky kind of way of demoing things. And you'll see me even write on paper, and I would hide the writing with my hand, and people kind of complain about that, in the video. So anyways, I did a bunch of videos because the first couple actually started picking up, because I was good at the technical content. I was not good at video creation, right? And so people kind of wanted to learn those things because Arduino was booming, Raspberry Pi was booming, and more and more people wanted to get into embedded systems. And so through that experience, I feel that I've learned a lot. I've learned how to like utilize the YouTube algorithm. I learned a little more on the content creation side. I remember, buying my first microphone for like $100, and it was one of those mics that doesn't go into a USB; it goes into the normal mic port, and I had to figure out the converters. That, like, I lost a bunch of money just like sunk into converters, into mics, into computers. So, long story short, over, let's say, like 5 years since that, I kind of wrote here and there, like you said, similar story. At the very beginning, I was very excited about creating videos, creating content. I would release a bunch of blogs, and then it kind of tempered off. And I think the reason for that is, and people may know this, but YouTube doesn't bring that much money in unless you're part of the very big guys, that have like hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I was making maybe like $100, which was cool because it still paid, for the electronics and the hardware that I was doing, but it was nothing to make a living off of, right? And so during that time, I was also looking for work, so I couldn't necessarily do all of that full time, right? So I found my first job, which was Mitsubishi Electric, and while I was starting to work, I had also interviewed with Procter and Gamble. And to give you a story there, Procter and Gamble has a very long time frame on their interviews. So I actually interviewed in the summer. It was, I think, June or July, and I didn't hear anything back from them until next February, right? So
Wow.
I thought like I'm like out of the race there. I still had a positive experience. I talked to a few managers, but it was nothing in person, right? So it was all over the phone. So I didn't think much more of it. I thought, I was done. I was gonna work at Mitsubishi Electric, and to be quite frank with you, like the job, I worked with very interesting people. I learned a lot at the beginning, but most of it was spreadsheets and very little technical work, right? And having come out of electrical engineering, I was like extremely hands-on. I'm like, I'm going to develop circuits. I'm going to troubleshoot things. I was somewhat disappointed on the, let's say, my work was going through Excel spreadsheets, figuring out which options the customers chose for their elevator systems, and then removing the ones that they didn't need. So literally just pure spreadsheet work. But it was still, I guess, an introduction to the real job market. So fairly grateful for the people I met and worked with. That being said, so P&G. So P&G reached out to me in February, and they said, look, we're still interested in speaking with you. How about we fly you out to a site that needs an electrical control systems engineer? They actually called it PCNIS, so process control and instrumentation systems. And so I was flown out to a site in Maine, Auburn, Maine, where I visited the site. So it's actually a very advanced site for P&G. It was an IWS 4 standard site, which is, I guess, the highest level of automation that you could find within the company. It won a lot of different awards, but so really cool. I walked the lines. I saw all the process automation. I didn't know what a PLC was at the time, but I knew that that's where I wanted to go, right? So I spoke to the people. I talked about the work that I would be doing, and I kind of immediately jumped on the opportunity. I think 2-3 weeks after that visit, I was getting packed up and essentially transported to Maine. Obviously, they paid for my tickets, but they also picked up all my stuff in a truck, picked up my vehicle, and I moved to Maine. And that's where I learned, I would say, like the bulk of my automation and systems integration, right? I started it, like I said, very fresh. I didn't know, I had never seen a PLC before then. In my electrical engineering degree, they didn't teach us any control systems except the very like math heavy calculations, MATLAB. I've listed C, C++. I've done quite a bit of that in the college years. Not so much now, but yeah. So started off extremely fresh, learned from engineers primarily. So I had very good mentors at that site. My boss was extremely technical at the time as well. So he taught me pretty much everything that I know now. And the projects were very challenging and interesting at the same time. So, looking back, I was at that time like 24, 25, right? So this was 6 years ago now. And having very little knowledge and experience, like 1 year in, I was tasked with like $10 million projects. And that's not to say, that I was implementing everything. I was part of a team, of course, but I was leading the electrical side, right? And for the most part, like I can also tell you that, you know, a lot of those systems were already like implemented. They didn't necessarily need to be redesigned from scratch, right? So it would be, let's say, like a new line rollout. You still have to validate everything. I was sent out to FATs. We would bring the equipment back to the US, and then obviously over a period of 3 months install the equipment, validate everything with third parties. But I was like leading that project from P&G standpoint. And to be quite frank with you, very, very challenging. It was, you know, a lot of times like stressful environment, but at the same time, I've learned the most, I feel like, in my career doing those projects. That being said, 2.5 years after that started, um, I think I've made a couple of mistakes in my personal life at that time, which were, number one, living very far from the site. So I had a 1.5 hour drive each way to work, which is extremely difficult, 3 hours of driving a day. Number two, the workplace, I guess, not the workplace, but where we lived was very different than what my girlfriend and I were used to, right? So we're always like very large city people and grew up in Montreal, then moved to LA, and here we were in Maine in a very small town of 10,000 people. So that was a really big change. And I think like those kind of things really played a big role in why I didn't enjoy being there as much as I thought I would. And so we were looking for a change. So when she graduated with her master's degree, we thought like maybe it's the right time to come back to LA. And so I quit P&G, moved to LA, joined Kraft Heinz in a more technical role. So they recognized my P&G experience and wanted me to help with one of their sites in Los Angeles to kind of bring it up to speed. So different, very different challenges. Like I was saying, like P&G was fully integrated. There was a lot of automation, very little interference on the operator side. And then on the Kraft Heinz side, it was extremely, I wouldn't say like manual, but a lot of old equipment. The standards were not in place. So I joined as a maintenance supervisor and tried to help on the maintenance side, but also, like I was saying, they recognized my electrical experience, so they wanted me to automate certain things and lead certain projects. And to my surprise, I guess 1 year after I joined that facility, they decided to close it down. So this was somewhat right after the merger. I don't know how much you know about the history of Kraft Heinz, but they were purchased separately by 3G Capital and then merged, right? So before it used to be Kraft Foods and then it was Heinz. They merged the two companies, and through cost-cutting initiatives, as they put it, they closed down the site in Fullerton, California. And so at the time, I was working with a very small systems integrator that was at the plant as an embedded resource, right? So he recognized, again, like my more than average electrical experience, right? A typical maintenance supervisor is mostly mechanical than electrical. They sure know control systems, but they don't program things, right? Maybe they maintain. And so I joined this very small company and pretty much spent the last 3 or so years with them, contracting back to Kraft Heinz. So my boss essentially got a whole bunch of contracts at different Kraft Heinz facilities, and I started traveling once they closed down that facility across the US, doing different systems integration work, but also doing some data, right? So my boss developed this application that would gather the data from PLCs and your control systems and then display it, anything from OEE to, like lost time to fault codes. And that's what I've been doing the last 3 years. I've also, as you've pointed out on this slide, started my MBA. So while I was doing that, I kind of also did my MBA because I think I recognized the need of, how to say, like business knowledge. If I want to grow, one of my goals is to start bringing in projects, and I want to understand that process a little bit more, right? So even if you work in a large company like Procter and Gamble, as an engineering manager, you're not only pushing down these engineering projects. You need to understand the financials. You need to understand their business impact on the bottom line, and you need to be able to propose those projects, right? And I didn't have as much experience in that as I wanted to. So sure, I traveled to different sites and proposed technical solutions, but my boss would ultimately negotiate the contracts and what we were doing. Coming back to SolisPLC, so as I was traveling, and I had that, like I was saying, experience writing blog posts and creating videos on embedded systems. I recognized that there were many questions on control systems, right? So when I would go to different sites and I would program the controls, I would get a lot of questions about, like, well, why are you programming this way, not that way? Like, where can we learn more? And I think there was a certain lack of resources. There were a few people already in the space. So I know that Paul Lin had a class on Udemy, but I thought I could maybe bring some, like, a different angle where I could showcase certain things a little bit better with the industry experience. And so I thought, like, it doesn't cost me much to get a better camera to throw up a class on Udemy and see how it does. And to my surprise, I guess it started fairly slow, but then it picked up. I think I was making $200-300 within like the first 3 months, and so that's $200-300 a month. And so I thought, like, well, like, people seem to be enjoying this, so I've released another course which was on HMIs. Then I released another one on vision systems, and how SolisPLC came to be is because I think Udemy lacks a certain level of, well, I guess first of all, they price all the courses at $10, right? And I think that there's a little bit more value in obviously depending on which area you're in. And so I think controls commands a certain premium on, on the content and on the knowledge. So I wanted to have a little bit more control, but also having more flexibility, like how I create content, right? So Udemy, for example, doesn't allow you to create certain types of coupons. I couldn't add people. Then they made like more changes where I wanted to give out like another class for free. Then they, for some reason, revoked that. So it was a lot of constraints, right? So ended up developing SolisPLC that gives a lot more flexibility. It's on Teachable, if that sounds familiar to anybody. But that's what we use to host the classes, and it has a full integrated platform like underneath. So essentially we upload the files and the videos and how it looks, and then we control, who gets access, like what the pricing model is. And we've been getting some really good responses. We had companies reach out, and I think it's in part of, the content on the website. It's part of the content on LinkedIn. So I'm still continuing what I had learned, back in 2013 with SolisPLC. So that's kind of, how it all built in a maybe in a long sense. But I think those early years experimenting with YouTube and experimenting with blogs, because I actually read quite a bit of information. I don't know if you know about Warrior Forum, but they share a lot of like, let's say, SEO knowledge. They share a lot about how to like build good ads, and it's in maybe a general sense, but there's quite a bit of good information there.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. I went through a program. There's a guy named Danny Eny. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He had something called the Audience Business Masterclass, and it's since evolved into something called Miracy, and he teaches people how to create online courses and do online business. Okay. And I didn't know anything about it. I took his course. It was somewhat expensive, and then didn't follow all of his directions or anything, but my stuff, same thing, kind of evolved. But so I tried Udemy, and I made a little bit of money from it, but it's like you said, they control all that. Plus Paul Lin has done a very good job there, but he's recently removed himself from that. Now he has PLC Dojo, which is seems like he's doing well with that.
I think it's the right move. Like, honestly, well, like I said, like, first of all, Udemy takes a very large cut, right? Out of the $10 that students pay, you typically get 2.5 to like $5. So that's number one. But also, it's very difficult to price yourself well, right? So I think Shane Welcher has done it, but what they do is they essentially don't advertise for you. So you can use them as a hosting platform, but if you price your own target, then they're not going to advertise your course, right? And so you're always stuck at this, you can call it like race to the bottom, but it's always $10, and they always run these promotions, and it's out of your control, right? So you're either in or you're out.
Yep. And of course, there's other people that have entered the market. I don't know if you've seen Stephen Gates stuff. I think he's at the very
Yep.
low beginning end, but he's
Mhm.
done a good job of advertising, which is, he does mailer campaigns and things. And of course, Paul Lynn. There's a guy named Don Fitchett. He's got software, and um, I think he teaches in-person classes like I do. That's another guy that's in the space. He has a group called Ben 95, and it literally was from 1995. And
Okay.
unfortunately, in my opinion, most of his software, which he also sells software, looks like it's from 1995. So he's kind
Yeah.
of got a lot of that. But so yeah, a lot of people in the space.
Yeah, I think there's competition, but I think there's still opportunity, right? Like I personally, like I can tell you that I refer people to other content creators whenever I think that they've done better than me in certain areas. And the example I always give is like Shane Welcher, right? Like I've mentioned him on Udemy, but I think he's got a very good servo drives course, right? And that's something that I'm looking to do. I haven't managed to get my hands on some hardware. I keep trying to, find servo drives at a reasonable price. Because again, I guess if we ever want to dive into financials, like I don't think that I make nearly enough what I would be making, in a traditional job with SolisPLC. It certainly provides a living expense, so to speak, but the hardware is very expensive, right? And especially on the Allen Bradley side. And I'm always looking for alternatives to try and teach some of the courses. But I think, to come back to that point, I think Shane has done a very good job with his servo drive course, and I have absolutely no reason not to refer people to him, especially when they ask about that area.
Mhm. Speaking of equipment, of course, you have quite a wall behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. It reminds me. Do you know Sean Tierney?
Yep.
Yeah, so I've met with him a couple times. I've actually driven up to the Northeast and met with him, and we talked a little bit about it. And he makes his entire living off of doing that and creating videos, and a lot of it is with corporate, clients and things like that. But he's got a wall, kind of like yours, and a big studio in a barn, and he spends all his time doing that. And now I see Tim Wilburn, which is another
Yep.
starting to create a lot of content, including physical products, which is
Hmm.
something I dabbled with. These things behind me, I built, and I built a build your own enclosure and actually published a book for it, which you can build it. It's out of extrusion
Hmm.
and it's got a ABS backboard and a plastic. It's all plastic, and you build your own box, and then you put your own components in it. And Sean, the reason I did that is because he said, these schools, they get their PLCs for free or for very, very cheap, which we don't, right? They wouldn't, Alan Bradley won't
Right.
give us anything cheap. But so what they need is they need a box to put it in, and they also don't necessarily know all the components that need to go in there to be wired into the box. So I put out a little book, and it's got how to wire your e-stop in. That's, I guess, my little gig on my enclosures is that I put the e-stop and the MCR in there and a little stack light, and so it can, it's used for simulating a system. But a lot of people are doing that, and I've realized as I've done it that it's hard to sell physical components. You got to
Right.
ship stuff. You got to have a bunch of suppliers, and it's probably not worth it. So I'm really using it more for my own use than anything else.
Yeah, and that's an interesting topic. I think we spoke about this a little bit in the past, right? About these training kits,
Yeah.
and sometimes I do get requests about developing something that's slightly different than what Tim has done, but I think it's an entirely different business area to start, shipping your own products to customers. There's a whole lot of I guess logistics would be the right word to put it,
Yeah.
because you have to take care of returns. People, might not necessarily wire up the way you recommend. Then you have to deal with, you know, I'm hoping that never happens, but you're still dealing with higher voltages than, the safe norm. So I just don't know what people could do with the systems and then get back to you. But I think also Tim has done a pretty good job, with his trainer kits. So I always point people in his direction as well, because I think maybe you could reinvent the wheel, but at the end of the day, there's not much to a controller and a couple of buttons that I could, design. And like I said, I've thought about it too, and his prices seem very competitive. So there's just like I could not go like any lower based on my calculations at least.
Right. I'm going to go ahead and clear this screen. Stop share. There we all are. Boy, there's a bunch of people here. I couldn't even see most of these people, but it shows like 7 people. Very
Yep.
cool. So I show you something I've been experimenting with. You can talk just for a second here. I want to bring something around since we're talking about hardware.
Yeah, I mean, in case people are interested in the wall, I'm actually working on putting together some kind of a list of items for SolisPLC so that everyone can, go through the list and look at the items that I've got, because I do get some questions about the wall. But like I said, I do need to create some kind of a bill of materials in case people are interested with what I'm working with.
Exactly. So this is kind of a funky looking little trainer. And this is something that, again, I tried to design this thing. It's a clear trainer, and it's for troubleshooting. And
I
the
like that.
reason, the reason I came up with this, all it is a reversing motor starter circuit. And it takes 31 wires to build something like that. And I built it purposely, like I built the stuff back here, as cheaply as possible, with the idea that people have been asking me for troubleshooting classes, including Automation NTH, which is kind of one of my big customers. Well, they have this bad habit of building very, very expensive things. So their trainer, like what's behind me, starts at $4,500. And they build it professionally. It's got a very big, solid cabinet and lots of things. They have a conveyor trainer that's another $4,500, and they can sell it to those corporate customers. Well, my problem is when I work with them, right? I do these design projects and things, but they don't have their product made yet. So I still have to create a course for them based on something. So a lot of times in my books, I'll use the trainer that I build, right? And then use that as the basis for a troubleshooting exercise or whatever. And then it evolves into, they take that book and they build a product out of it and they sell it to their big corporate customers. But meanwhile, I'm left with things like this, which again, I put together bill of materials and I could sell it, but it would be, if somebody ordered one, it would probably take me a half a day to put it together. And I certainly don't make that much. I made it cheap. So there's that dilemma. I think Tim has his kids and his wife, and he's got a nice big shop, and he's doing physical stuff anyway, which is probably how he can do that. Plus, he's got a big market. He's done a good job with that. And I refer people to him too. Yeah.
Yeah. I've actually, I had somebody reach out to me about HMI kits. So they wanted enclosures for training purposes on the system that they're deploying at a customer site. And I've referred that person to Tim because, I mean, I know that they've got a full panel shop. I think you also need to be fairly equipped to, do that kind of work quickly. I've seen I don't know if you've seen the automatic wire cutter. He has, a spool of wire that just get like unwound and then cuts it at like specific lengths.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
like for me to do that manually, it's just not going to be sustainable. But yeah,
exactly. Just the wires in this thing. I made 2 of these trainers, and my wife actually came in here, cut 80 wires, crimped ferrules on both ends of them, and it's really just not cost effective. That's
exactly.
the problem with it. But at the same time, if you're going to teach a class, one of my dilemmas has been I've taught live since 2013 for a Canadian company, automation training, and every time I teach these classes, most of the people are in there to learn maintenance, troubleshooting, not programming.
Yep.
So we say we teach PLC programming classes, but most people, they want to maintain a machine. Some of them aren't even allowed to change the program, right? If you're in pharmaceutical or validated software, you can't even change it. So it's troubleshooting. But then how do you teach a class, right, without teaching people what timers and bits and things are? And then all of a sudden it's the last day of a class, and then we get into troubleshooting, and we don't have anything physical to troubleshoot with. We just say, here's how you trace stuff through the program. And so is that a troubleshooting class? Well, not really, right? There's use of a meter and so how do we evolve that, involve that into the course? I don't have an answer for that, right? Without hardware.
What are your thoughts? what are your thoughts on creating some kind of a maybe IKEA type of a hardware kit, right? Where you can, let's say you order the kit that you've just showed, but it comes essentially disassembled,
Yep.
and then you could assemble the kit based on instructions or a video, and you have maybe a series. I was thinking about this idea too. You'd have series or scenarios that would be described like move this wire here, and then you troubleshoot. But of course, there needs to be some thought put into that because I think it's difficult to do with just a wired system. But if you have a controller on top of it, then you could essentially create different programs that you would then put on the PLC and simulate different scenarios, right?
Yep. So I did that. I actually kind of created that. So here's the book. Lots of colored pictures, and it literally starts at the beginning, and it's hard to see here, but there's the kit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's all the wires and all the things you need for it. And then before that,
Do you ship the kit, or how does it work? You can purchase it.
I don't, and that's part of the reason. So here's the enclosure, enclosure part of the kit.
Yep.
So there's all the plastic pieces, and you can actually bolt together your own enclosure. The problem is, like I said, all those parts come from different people. So I actually built, I think I have enough for 10 kits here. Let's see, this one right behind me here, that's one of the kits. So extrusion corners, it's got a mesh side so that you can stick cables through it. But when it came down to it, you have to cut the pieces of extrusion. You have to tap the ends. You could order them tapped, right? I got a lot of stuff from Automation Direct. You had to mount probably at least pre-drill and tap the holes for the DIN rail. There's an issue there because depending on where you cut the DIN rail, the holes ended up in different places. So it's kind of custom, and again, unless you have a panel shop. The other thing is that enclosure alone, I want to say has $250 to $300 worth of parts. Well, to make any kind of profit on it and account for the time that it takes to put it together, you're marking it up to the point where you could just buy your own enclosure. The advantage of this is it already has the holes drilled in it. But the disadvantage to that is the holes may not be where the customer wants them, right? And it may not use the component that the customer wants. And if they were to go out and do a customized kit, they would have to design it, use CAD, do all the things. But I did create this, and it's a professionally kind of done book. It's actually published. You can order it from Amazon. But I sort of gave up on the building and shipping and advertising of it. I figured out that the book itself has actually brought me some income. What I'm probably going to do is redo it with the actual bill of materials and say, get your own materials. Here's the CAD drawing for the plastic. Go to your local plastic supplier and have this made, or order it from the people that I order it from in Nashville. That's an idea. But then people again are there, is it economical to do that for one kit? Are you going to order a piece of plastic from a company in Nashville that I'll tell you it takes them 2 weeks to get it to me, and one thing is not even worth it, right? It's not worth their time to make one plastic piece or something, or four, or whatever they are. So I don't know what the answer is. I thought seriously about stocking all this and having all the parts pre-made up, but the logistics of it, plus I'm on the road a lot. I do systems integration, I teach classes, and I travel for fun. I'm getting old, so I'll never retire, but I consider myself half retired. I kind of take time off when I want to, and the rest of the time,
No, for sure. I think, as we discussed earlier, a different line of business. I feel like if you really want to, I think, do it right with these kits, but at the same time, it's just difficult to provide them at a certain price range, especially not having like a full-size panel shop. And I think it also needs to warrant a certain number of orders for you to have a panel shop, right? It's if you're gonna sell like 2 kits a week or a month even, it's just not worth investing in those tools. So I don't know what the solution is either. Like I said, people have been asking, and usually I refer everybody to Tim Wilborn because he makes it, I guess, worth his while. But even speaking to him, like you said, he sells a lot to colleges, just like Sean Tierney does. And I think in some instances, I think it's subsidized on the college level, but somebody still pays like the full cost to him in the end and makes it worth his while, I guess. Or they order like different materials. I just don't know. But I think some of the PLCs he sells at like $800, including the PLC and the training kit, right? And I know that I can probably not get that PLC alone for less than $600. So
That's right.
I don't know how he makes it so cost effective.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Amatrol?
I have not.
So if you go to the tech schools, most of the little tech schools and junior colleges, things like that, a lot of them have some very nice equipment. Big extrusion models, like there's one on the wall behind me, but you can't really see it, that I built for my own little factory. They cost upwards of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a small imitation factory with some conveyors and valve banks and things like that. Well, they almost own the market in the junior college trainer market, and they have manufacturers reps that run around and sell these big expensive things. But again, for a smaller company, right, they would be more likely to build something like I have on the wall behind me, or you have on the wall behind you. They'll take a big piece of plywood and they'll stick a bunch of things on the board, and they'll call it their trainer kit or whatever. But that, Amatrol builds some good stuff. The downside to them is they are extremely basic, and the reason is a tech school is kind of catering to the lowest common denominator. I've dealt with some of the tech schools around here, and they get 18-year-old kids that maybe don't have anything else to do, and they say, well, I'd like to go into technology. And so what is technology, right? So they hire a maintenance guy to teach a PLC class, and then Amatrol provides the training materials. And it is by its nature at a much lower level than what you or I would be teaching in a class. So
they've got some interesting stuff, though. I see there's even some robotic cells, but I would assume that those would be very expensive, and it probably don't include like the FANUC robot that you'd need to purchase as well.
Exactly.
But it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that these are worthwhile for college, like you said, but I think the market that I was trying to cater to, again, because I was in the position of being a student, and you just cannot afford a lot of this hardware and software, right? Let alone like full simulation materials. And I think that with just a PLC, right, just a MicroLogix 1100 series that I've got sitting up here, you can learn pretty much everything you need to land a job, right? Like you don't necessarily, I think you should learn how to troubleshoot, and you should, learn how to work with some of these other systems, but you don't need that to get into the field, right? Like if you just know the basics, and again, like I've talked to many people, I've interviewed people, and I've hired people, you don't need to be able to program robots or even work with P&ID loops to be able to convince somebody to hire you, right? And I think that's where I was trying to position myself, especially with SolisPLC, and I'm trying to make it as affordable as possible. And ultimately, like my vision is that passing on the savings so that you could purchase, an entry-level controller. Again, this MicroLogix, I think on eBay is $200, and you can run the free version of RSLogix 500 on it, right? So you get some hands-on experience. You don't need the very expensive, control logics, for example, that you would see in the field. So, I mean, like that's my thinking. For sure, people would like, I think, to have these kits. I myself, like I was saying, I'm looking for servo motors and controllers, but those can be, just one servo motor with a driver. And I'm talking eBay prices, not even new, could be a couple of grand, right? Like easily. Yep. And brand new, it could be 10, if not 20 grand. So yep.
I've got a unique situation with this company in Miami that I do work for. They're a bottling plant, and they have some very big, expensive equipment. And what they'll do is they will buy an old line, the entire line that's being shut down or whatever, for just the mechanical components that go inside of one machine. They said that that mechanical component that was in stores or whatever will pay for the entire line. So they get extra servo drives, they get extra motors. Now they end up using a lot of them, you know, in their own things in the plant, and then the rest of them sit outside in big shipping containers, and they cannibalize them sometimes, and sometimes they get rained on, and you know,
Yeah.
it used to be you could go into some of these plants and pick things up, and people didn't know what they had. But now, like you said, eBay and Amazon are full of people reselling, you know, expensive servos and things like that. And I think the going price is what, half the price of a new one or something, which is still expensive.
Sometimes even lower. Sometimes even lower. You know, you can find some really good deals on eBay if you're patient, if you know what you're looking for. I think it's important to know the exact part numbers, because you can very easily fall in the trap of again, with some of these servos, the drives are not compatible with certain versions, the plugs are not compatible, the wires are not compatible. So there's a few traps, I guess, for those who are just getting started. But you know, that reminds me of an interesting, I guess, like story. So P&G would bring in very expensive lines, and they would bring in, I remember working on this R&D project that was like a $15 million line, so full manufacturing line, developed for testing a very specific change within that process. At the end of that project, right, so this was a 2-year long initiative, when they had proven that the process was essentially good enough to be reapplied to actual lines, they had to scrap that line because it comes out of the financial, like, R&D bucket, right? And we're not talking about some basic controllers. We're talking 10 plus L81 processors, right? Like, each processor is like 12K at the time. And so you could not take any of those parts and put it in your maintenance stock or use on any other projects. Because of the way, like, the books were structured, we were specifically instructed that this is going into scrap, and it was sold for metal, essentially metal price, and it had to be scrapped. You could not take a single controller off that line. But that's just, I guess, like, that's just the nature of, I think, of a disconnect between, you know, plant floor personnel and very high up management that in some ways just like shifts the numbers in a book and kind of dictates how it's really going to be done. But I think that's what, you know, to tie that in to maybe my current venture in the MBA, it's understanding why it is done that way. Because I think in many of these manufacturing facilities that are not led by, you know, a smaller company where, you know, the owner is very disconnected at the top, you have finance leaders just shuffling things around, because at the end of the day, for them, it's not about control systems. For them, it's about product out the door, right? And I think it's different environment. But just, I guess, like, aside, that made me like really disappointed in how, you know, control systems were thrown away and just discarded.
Yeah, it could have been donated to schools or something, you know, or I don't know, people who needed education in the inner city or something,
Yep.
you know. It's kind of too bad, yeah, like you said.
It's one of those things, you know, it's like donating like computers. They could not donate a computer because on the hard drive you could have proprietary information. And then even if you say, like, we can erase it, like, no, the hard drives need to be destroyed with a mallet, because we don't understand technology, and if there's proprietary information or was proprietary information, then it has to be destroyed. So that's how it went. You know, there was no arguing with people upstairs, so to speak. That
Yep.
was just what I was told.
You can have this rack, but we have to pull the processor out and beat it with a sledgehammer and get rid of
Yes.
this $12,000 processor because it might
Exactly.
have P&G program on it or something.
Yes.
So that's interesting. So I read some of your blog stuff, and it said you also do woodwork, right?
Oh,
That
yeah.
kind of thing.
So over the years, I picked up a lot of different hobbies. So I did woodworking for a while. Now I'm a lot into gardening. So I purchased a house. It's been like 4 months or so now. So I'm actually getting ready for some gardening stuff. But yeah, like, over the years, I guess I've tried many different things. I had bought a wood lathe and started making things on wood lathes just for fun. Very simple things like bowls and goblets and stuff. Um, got somewhat bored of that, but I had also a small blog on that topic too. So I was writing some articles on woodworking for a while. Like I said, got into gardening now, just all kinds of like different things over the years. Um, Maybe talk a little bit about the app development. So back in the PNG days, I, for whatever reason, wanted to learn iOS development. And I had a couple of friends who had an interesting idea. So that's where kind of like Bloom Chat stemmed out of. But the idea was to create this messaging platform that would allow you to send a message just like you do to an individual, but to a business, right? So instead of, for example, picking up the phone and calling a restaurant like, hey, can we book a table this Friday? You would just text the restaurant and say, like, can we book a table this Friday for this many people? And the idea was like long term, you could automate that system. And so the restaurant would have almost like an AI bot or a simple chat bot that would, allow you like, I want to book a table. And so you don't ever speak to anybody, but you've booked a table through text messaging. And the idea was the same for like a hairdresser, for a dentist, like you could make appointments using text messages. So long story short, we developed that app with a couple of friends of mine. So I was responsible for the iOS portion of the app. So I learned everything on Swift. Those of you who are familiar, so there's like Swift and there's Objective-C. Swift was a very recent language in those years. I think it was 2010, 2011 release, but it was where iOS was going. So anyways, developed that app. And then we struggled when we released, we struggled a lot because it's a two-sided marketplace. So it's like you don't have the people that want to join the app until businesses have joined the app, and businesses don't want to join the app because there's not enough people. And so I guess being maybe young at the time or naive, like I guess things just didn't pick up the way we were hoping they would pick up. And we did a lot of knocking on doors and trying to get like businesses on board, literally just speaking to people and business owners. And it was very difficult. It was extremely difficult. We've sunk, I think, like 3 to 6 months on just like trying to get people to sign up. We had also a video that we tried to raise some money with, right? The usual like venture capital type of a path. Weren't able to raise. And I think ultimately just being discouraged kind of gave up on that idea. That was summer 2016. But I spent a lot of my hours, I was working at P&G, and then I would come home and work on the app and develop features. And I mean, learned quite a bit on the iOS development side. I don't do it that much anymore, but it was still an interesting venture, I would say, and learned quite a bit through that. And I guess to come back again, my timeline, that's where I kind of joined Techstars. So Techstars is actually an early stage VC firm. And so I had made a connection being part of, I guess, like the Bloom Chat and like pitching the ideas. And I actually interned there just to see how like the venture capital structure like works and how they work with companies at an accelerator out of Los Angeles.
Okay.
So for 3 months, I kind of worked with some companies that were developing their ideas.
Yeah, here in Nashville, we have something called the Entrepreneur Center, and it's grown quite a bit. I was a member early on, and then my daughter owns a branding company, and she worked out of there for a while. And there were companies in there doing somewhat like you're explaining. They would develop some kind of an app, and they would be spending a lot of time. Of course, in Nashville, it's a big entertainment area, so they'd go around downtown trying to sign up all the honky tonks and businesses down there into some Nashville specific app. And then I think they did a decent job here, and they said, well, we're going to go to Austin and we're going to try to launch the same thing. And I don't know whether they're successful or not in this case, but I think those entrepreneur centers, incubators, accelerators can be very helpful in those things. But like you said, we all come up with these ideas, like my different panels here and my kits, and some work, some don't. I've found that the book writing has worked better than the video making and things like that. And then this Automation Academy, which I started thinking it was going to be PLC programming classes. And then I realized how hard it is to make videos, how long it takes to make a professional video. And also the people that were joining were asking for systems integration information, not PLC programming information. There was lots of PLC program classes out there. Of course, on YouTube, a lot of it's free. Probably 1,000 people putting out some kind of YouTube videos, many of
Yeah.
not very good quality. But so it's migrating. My own little project here is migrated into more of a systems integration, and people join because they want to, they have a very specific thing that they want to study. One of them was a guest here, Lucas Wetton was, I think, the 2 webinars ago, and he built a dust collection system from scratch, and he had no electrical experience of any
I
kind.
was there. I was
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
It
you
was
were
a
there.
very
Yeah.
interesting episode. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. He went
It's
up.
it's
He's
go ahead.
building that thing. Actually, he's in Ohio right now, starting that thing up, and 100 horsepower drive and all. And he doesn't know anything much about electricity, and here he is up there doing a 100 horsepower drive startup. It's amazing, and apparently he's done a pretty good job at it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see. I guess he went through a full, like development phase. I was, personally, I'm not extremely well versed in AutoCAD. So in the sense that I've reviewed a lot of AutoCAD drawings, but typically I'm more involved in the design phase, right? So I would recommend what components we're going to put in, and then the companies would typically have somebody else do the CAD drawings. But he had done a complete CAD drawing. He had done like part selection. I'm assuming he's going to do some programming on that PLC on his own, or you're going to help him. But like to your previous point, I think like systems integration plays a very critical role in knowing how to teach these systems, right? And I think you've kind of alluded to this, but I think there's a lot of people who teach these classes, but they don't have a full understanding of what's happening in the field, right? And I really hope that I still stay in touch, although I'm creating a lot more content now. I am planning to do a lot more integration work combined with the content, right? Because I do want to see how it's done in the field, because challenges are different, right? It's one thing to show how to program this wall, and it's a whole other thing to understand how a processing plant or chemical plant or what have you is going to utilize this equipment. And I think that's where like the real challenges lie after you've learned how to use these basic functions.
Yeah, and there's no substitute for experience. And how do you get the experience if you don't have the knowledge? And then how do you get the knowledge if you don't get the experience? And that was Lucas mentioned in his webinar. He said he spent 4 hours after wiring his system up tracing. He had one misconnected wire, and of course he doesn't have any electrical background, and he had connected it to an input instead of like a common or something. And he said it took him literally 4 hours to find that.
Yep.
And that is actually very valuable, right? Having gone through that, he will remember the next time. Oh, well,
of course, of course.
Don't check the same thing over and over again, which I tend to a lot of times do. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I think you've nailed it, or he nailed it, but there's a lot to be said about experience. And I think people sometimes underestimate having seen that system in person, right? I mean, I can tell you one story. I remember at P&G, we had a cable for a safety system that had corrosion on it, right? So over time, no matter what your environment is, it could be as dry as can be humanly possible, you still get some corrosion on your cables. And I remember this specific connector. It was a Harding plug. I don't know if you're familiar with Harding, you must be. But it had corroded on the pins to the point that instead of giving 24 volts on your safety circuit, it would sometimes go as low as like 17. And that's like the kind of stuff that you never learn on paper, right? Like you're measuring voltages and like the system is fine, but then it would like intermittently trip, right? And then like everything's reset, everything's fine, like we're running, and then like a few hours later it would still trip again. And you're pulling e-stops, like that's like the most obvious thing. You're opening doors, that have that like safety key that goes into your device. And like that's the very difficult, like then you start measuring resistances, and that's not something that you'd normally do in like a safety circuit. You'd normally just measure voltage, and they seemed okay in an energized system, but like I said, intermittently the resistance of that wire was just higher than expected. And I mean, I'm sure we both have hundreds, if not thousands, of these like random stories with servo drives, with just like even basic, I'll tell another one, a variable frequency drive. So at Kraft Heinz, we had this installation with, multiple conveyors up in the ceiling where we'd send boxes to the palletizing area, right? And so I come in one morning, the fuses were blown on this specific variable frequency drive that drove like one of the conveyors. There was like 3 layers of conveyors. One of them had the fuses blown. So we're like, okay, like let's just replace the fuses. We replaced the fuses, everything works fine. Like we measured out, the motor was fine, the cables were fine, everything's running. What else is there to say? Next morning, the fuses were blown again, right? So at that point in time, you should probably troubleshoot a little bit better, but I, the technician, whoever, just put in bigger fuses, right? Like you got to get the system running. So we put in bigger fuses. The system was fine the entire day, like no problem, no issues. The fuses are blown again the next morning, right? So it kind of seemed to happen like overnight. Like what changes overnight? Well, nothing really. Like boxes are being sent. Long story short, we went up like higher fuses until there was a problem with the motor, right? So like it was just there was nothing else like to go wrong. And then we audited the entire system. We put cameras like on the conveyor belt. So what was happening in the night shift specifically, there was an operator that would use, so we had conduit, along the different rows of conveyors. And like I was saying, there were 3 stacks of those conveyors. So the operator, to clear the top row, would climb with his like foot on the conduit. And inside of that conduit, because that was done like so many times, it would essentially like flex, right? Like the conduit flexes where it was connected, and it had eaten through the insulation in that wire. And so when he would step, it would short to the conduit. And to your point of experience, like that's not something that you would ever see before and expect to be done to a system, right? And it's not something that you could test for in your PLC logic on your drive. Like there's just it's just a short that happens because of how the machine is operated. And long story short, I guess we figured out the problem, replaced the cables, re-explained to the operators what they could and could not do. But yeah, just an interesting thing that I will never forget. So
Very cool. Yep, and it's the cumulative, right, experiences like that is what make people able to troubleshoot and etc. Well, this has been great, and it's mostly the end of the time. And I had a couple things about mastering the machine, how I started this and everything, but I think this has been in other videos too. So that's why this is called Mastering the Machine. It comes from my original little blog post thing. And then I have a little final slide here. The next webinar is April 16th, and I have no idea who's on it. So far, this has evolved into something that I've had a guest now every time since November. And I do this every 2 weeks. So, so far I've found somebody, to sit with. We talked about Dave Griffith. And of course, we didn't mention the manufacturing hub, but Vlad has a podcast with Dave Griffith. It's very interesting, called the Manufacturing Hub, and they get on Zoom just like we do here, and they talk about all kinds of different subjects. They've had some good guests. Yeah, a good recruiter guy. I think. Did you have the guy from Envision Technology?
Yeah, we did.
The other day?
Preston.
I
Yeah,
him.
that's right.
Yeah, Preston Hadley. Yeah, I missed him. So it's funny. All of us know each other probably through LinkedIn as much as anything, but also we're in these sometimes competing spheres, right? We all have content, and we have things online. There's room, of course, for everybody, but it's kind of interesting how you get to know everybody. And Vlad and I had a conversation, I don't know, maybe a year ago or something.
Yep.
Just we kind of got on a Zoom call, I believe, and talked, and it's been a neat thing. Yeah.
No, it's a great space. I think there's a lot of people doing very interesting things, right? And speaking, I think, to someone who's been in a place where you're looking to go is extremely important, right? So like Preston, for example, is developing his own systems integration firm, and to some extent starting out, but I think he's got like a year and a half in already. But he's got experience, on how to get projects, like what kind of people he works with. So I was very interested in learning about that process, right? Because that's what I'm looking to do going forward. And so I think you can always learn things from different people because everybody has their own angle, right? And their own experience. Again, I think this is very different from traditional systems integration. There's a lot of unknowns. Even I learn about how to utilize social media better. Like we've experimented with the manufacturing hub with Dave for what is it now, topics, but we're still making mistakes. We're trying things. I think maybe to tie it back to the whole like entrepreneurship venture and what you've mentioned with your trainer kits, I think it's important to test ideas. You know what I mean? Like it might be unsuccessful at any point in time, and my ideas fail all the time, but I think what's really important is to try things and develop yourself and hopefully learn something from that experience, right? And I think that's what brings you to a point where you can, I think, build something that's successful.
Yeah.
That's at least my thought.
And if there was any advice I'd offer here, I'd say you have to be willing to evolve. When I started this Automation Academy thing, like I said, I thought it was going to be PLC training, and then people were asking for a different thing. And now it's evolved into something that, you know, I teach sometimes students. I charge X amount per day, and I have students, and they naturally join. Why? Because all the content that's in there, I'll say, you need to upload this document and, you know, save this thing, watch this video. And they get ahead before I actually sit down and teach the classes. So right now, for instance, I've got a student on there. He's a Chinese PhD guy, and he works for something called the MITRE Corporation, which I looked up, and they do some kind of cyber security kind of stuff, but he wants to learn PLC programming. Well, I don't know why he wants to learn PLC programming, and in the first class, we'll talk about that. But based on what he wants, I will point him to the things he might need, because I don't even think he knows what platform he wants to study yet, right? But yet they've paid for it. He wants to take the classes, and who knows? Maybe he wants to learn how to hack them. You know, I don't know. But
I was not going to mention that, but like cybersecurity company out of China trying to learn PLCs. And
well, they're a cybersecurity company out of the U.S. and he's he just works for them. But they may be, you know, testing things or whatever. And of course, one of the things I've got on there is an article on Stuxnet, right? Which, for those who don't know, is a virus that infected the S7 PLCs in Iran, of all places. And there's a whole story that goes behind that, and people can look it up online or whatever. But that it may be related to that kind of stuff. And of course, now cybersecurity is huge. So
yeah, that's a whole topic. I was just gonna say, even Allen Bradley PLCs. I don't know if you saw, there was a tech note circulating fairly recently about vulnerabilities in earlier versions of PLCs, and I think it's gonna continue to pick up, right? Because ransomware is becoming bigger and bigger, I guess, or bigger revenues for certain people in the world. And so it's going to be more and more important as these PLCs are getting on the network, right? So in the past, like you'd have very little, I'd say, connectivity from your plant floor to the MES or just the general plant network. But nowadays, it's pretty much a must for every device, right?
Yep, manufacturing 4.0 and getting on the cloud, and you know, being able to connect in, even looking on your phone just for convenience. You know, that's it's going that way. But at the same time, people are getting more sophisticated on how to hack into it. But you're right, that's a topic maybe for another time. I would have to get people a lot more knowledgeable about it than I am to get involved in that. But well, this has been great,
me too.
Vlad. I'm appreciate it, and some of the stuff you've got up there. It looks like you've got some servo drives up there. Is that not a Kinetics?
So here I've got the two Kinetics. So it's a 350 and 5500.
Oh, yeah.
Like I was saying, I'm still trying to find the actual servos because that's the hard part too. But I've got the drives for what it's worth, so I can maybe toggle some parameters on the drives, but still trying to get all of the hardware.
Well, and there's the cables and the connectors and all that. We just went through a bunch of specking that down at ABD in Miami, and yeah, it's not obvious. You go through all the Allen Bradley documentation of what kind of connectors you need and sizing your motors and what kind of encoder and feedback cables, and it's no matter what, you're going to spend some money.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap it up here. As I mentioned, the next webinar will be April 16th, and I'm not sure who will be on, but I do this every 2 weeks for the Automation Academy and Mastering the Machine. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you for having me, Frank. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.